Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Alex tuku ingoa no whanganui au, ki te noho au ki Wellington, kia tipu pai aku tamariki, ki whakanuia aku kia whina o mua, te whakamana tangata, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Hi everyone, thank you very much to CERC for the opportunity to share our journey of change in sport here in New Zealand Aotearoa. I opened by introducing myself in Māori. I spoke to where I'm from, in Wellington here in New Zealand, that I want to shape the lives of my own kids, Caleb, Dylan and Billy, that I treasure the relationships that have shaped me in my life, and many of those are from my time in Canada in sport, and also what's important to me is actually making a difference in the lives of others. So there's no other or no better way to do that than through sport. So we're actually going through quite a bicultural rebirth here in New Zealand at the moment, honouring our commitments to Te Tiriti, our native people. I'm really enjoying that learning journey. I'm learning a lot along the way. So hopefully you pick up some of our te reo throughout today's message. So over the next 30 minutes, I'll provide you some quick New Zealand context, discuss the challenges that we face here in New Zealand, talk about our implementation of Balance is Better, our journey along the way, and sort of reflect on a few learnings that we've had as we've gone about it. So let's get into it. New Zealand's made up of 3 relatively small islands in the South Pacific. We have a huge population of 5 million people. We do boast that we have many Kiwis abroad, and we're good neighbours to Australia. So if you haven't visited yet, come on down. We'd love to see you. And actually summer's on the way. I know how harsh that Canadian winter can be. We've got a really proud sporting journey, sporting history in New Zealand, and we would say that sport's in our DNA. We like to say we punch above our weight on the international stage, especially in rugby, our national sport, but also in other international sports and targeted Summer Olympic sports as well. We've enjoyed relatively high participation in sport and physical activity rates in comparison to other nations. However, we're starting to see those participation statistics start to slide in the wrong direction. So before I sort of tell you more about that, I wanted to just give you some background in terms of our role. So Sport New Zealand is a government agency, very similar to Sport Canada. Our role is the kaitiaki, which is actually the guardian of the play, active rec and sports system. This would have just read Sport 8 years ago, which speaks somewhat to the changing tides in our country, which is a great thing. We have 2 sort of business units. One is Sport New Zealand, of which I'm in, and we're all about physical activity, which is the focus of today. The other arm is High Performance Sport New Zealand, which is more about winning on the world stage. But regardless of which organisation, what's the focus of New Zealanders, or the reason we get investment from our government, is to support the wellbeing of all of our nation. That's because we know there's a direct correlation between physical activity and what that does for our wellbeing, whether that's physical, social, emotional, spiritual. So it's not sport for sport's sake. We're receiving dollars because we know that sport and physical activity has such a big impact on the health of our nation. So we have a 12-year strategic direction, and we've chunked that into 4-year strategies. And in our current 4-year strategy, our focus is on young people. So this sort of slide here gives you a bit of a sense of our focus. So for tamariki, which is 5 to 11, we focus on play and PE. For rangatahi, which is 12 to 18, we focus on sport and active rec. So now I'm going to sort of dive into the sport lane, which is where I sit within the business. So within sport, our focus is on reducing the drop-off in participation, also improving the activity levels of those rangatahi that are not active. So let's start to look at how we go about that. Well, as you can all understand, it is probably really important to acknowledge and embrace that trying to influence change in the sports system is complex and really messy. It's really challenging. So as you all appreciate, we have different views and perspectives. People arrive in the sports system, often shaped by their lived experiences. So we have clubs, schools, we have national sporting organisations, local government, coaches, parents. They all have different views and perspectives on what's right. So as we work in this space, I sort of use the analogy of it's like we're swimming against a current that's working in the other way. A lot of what we feel is right for our young people, society's moving in a different direction. But that's no reason to accept what's going on. It's probably more reason to work even harder to do what's right for our young people. You'll connect with this, no doubt, in a way that works in Canada and your nation, in the different provinces and territories, and districts and communities. But I won't go into a lot of detail here. COVID aside, we're living in a rapidly changing and complex world. Increases in activity and obesity. We're seeing poorer health statistics. The rate of cultural diversity is increasing. And the areas of our population that are increasing the fastest are those that are the least active. The impact of technology is huge on our young people. Managing that at home with my own kids is a daily grind. And we know that urbanisation is sort of accelerating change as well. So in short, we're seeing less people active, and for a pool of 5 million people, it's also an even smaller pool to support the development of people at the right time. So the world's changing fast around us, as it is, I'm sure, for you, and we still have a really large dependence on volunteers to deliver our sports system, and keeping up with the pace of change, especially with volunteers, makes that even more challenging. So as mentioned, there's many ways we can frame the challenge. So I'm just going to share a little bit of data here in terms of the challenge we face in New Zealand. What you're seeing in front of you at the moment is information from our National Participation Survey, Active NZ. What you'll see is a steep decline in the participation rates of our young people. So that's both in the amount of hours they do per week and also in the amount of activities they're doing per week. And that starts to skyrocket down at around about sort of 13 years of age. And then from about 18 years of age, we never actually get above the World Health Organization guidelines of 7 hours of physical activity a week. Hence why our effort and our focus in sport is in this youth sport space for our rangatahi. So a few other pieces of data that we have. So this is information from the School Sport New Zealand census. So young people that are playing in school settings at secondary school. I think it's college for you in Canada. So as you'll see, it's painting a picture of decline. So most traditional sports, their participation isn't increasing. Now, this data here are people that compete in inter-school competition. This is not including intra-school competition. So what's also concerning for us is that which is approximately 55% of our young people play against other students from other schools. So 45% of our young people that are at school aren't actually picked up in these numbers. So, you'd hope that they're playing in a club setting, but I think we know that some of them just aren't active and they're not participating in sport. So it's starting to paint the picture around the challenge that we face. So when I take this a step further, there's a significant piece of research here in New Zealand a few years back in 2019, and the 4 key findings you have in front of you. 2 I'd like to highlight because it's not that different probably in other parts of the world. So the first one is that the active rec and sport offerings aren't meeting the needs of our young people, our teenagers. So what we're serving up is not what they want. And also that organisations aren't working together to provide good experiences for our young people. So these were significant findings, probably just highlighted what we felt was out there. Another piece of data, probably the most important data in some ways, you'd say, is actually the voice of the young people themselves, our rangatahi. So what this captures from, now this is mirrored, we have different participation data that goes out. So we have a voice of participant, that a national survey that goes through clubs, through NSOs, and we also have a voice of rangatahi. So that's a capture that goes straight to young people through school settings. And this picture here really speaks to what the data says to us. So on your left-hand side, it's telling you what young people want more of. So you can see music, developing fitness, feeling confident, teamwork. On the right-hand side, the no way is what they want less of. So less fitness testing, less being yelled at by a coach, less of all the sorts of things you can see there. And what our data tells us is that actually 30% of our young people want the competitive stuff on the right-hand side. 70% want more, I say, informal, more social, more participation-focused sport offerings. That's really important for us in our sports system to understand. We also know that young people want more sport. So 73% want to do more sport and physical activity. So we don't have a demand issue, we have a supply issue here. So this, as you can see, hopefully that shapes what we're seeing, the challenge we face. And as you can see, the evidence is overwhelming. It's shouting at us that there's a need for change. And we know it's complex, we know it's hard, but we can't just accept that. So here in New Zealand, we've said, well, we've got to do things differently. And what does that look like? So now we'll move you into how we've approached some of that change. And actually we've had some pretty overwhelmingly sort of exciting progress, actually probably beyond our beliefs, but let's share a little bit of that journey. So this started with the Balance is Better philosophy. So back in 2016, actually 2015, we embarked on some significant research and engagement throughout the country. We talked to other nations, we did a literature review, we talked to key roles in our sports system, brought together a thought leaders group. And a combination of that qualitative and quantitative data and some common sense thinking led to sort of the Balance is Better plan, the talent plan. And that's evolved into the Balance is Better philosophy. And being quite clear here, Balance is Better is about all young people receiving a quality experience in sport, regardless of their ability, their needs, and their motivations. And it's also about young people reaching their potential at the right time from a performance perspective. These two factors are not mutually exclusive. And that's often misunderstood. People don't think you can have the fun and the enjoyment without the performance. So a big part of our work has been how we actually work with our partners in our sports systems to make sure they can put opportunities in place that do both. So to give you a little bit more background around Balance is Better, what's been really important for us at national, regional and local levels is first understanding why there's a need for change. We've found that actually if organisations don't understand the why, then your chance of actually influencing change is really low. So I've already touched on some of the why in terms of the macro information and the data, that's very clear, but a lot of the why that sits in communities, the stories, the conversations are actually sit around misunderstanding of issues that sit in youth sport. So for us, there are many issues, but we package sort of 3 issues, and this is where we started a lot of our education. As you can see, those 3 issues are there in front of you. And they're really prevalent here in youth sport. We feel it's a lack of understanding of these issues that is actually directly linked to a lack of value or actually no sport offering that's being received to our young people. So the lack of access, equitable opportunities, whether women and girls with disability are receiving the same opportunities as others, comes down to actually the competition structures that are being driven and how people see those opportunities. So often people drop out or don't want to be involved if that quality experience is not there. And there's really challenging unintended consequences, both for the participation and the wellbeing of all young people, but also from a performance perspective, is too much load and some of those behaviours aren't helping them, give them the best chance of reaching their potential at the right time. We also know here in New Zealand that people, coaches, administrators, volunteers, parents, they're not purposely doing the wrong thing here. They're doing what they think is right for the young people. So a big part of this has been education. An analogy I use, unfortunately, 80% of the resources that go into sport start to go into about 20% of our young people. Those are the ones that are streamed in competitive teams and rep teams or are deemed to have more future potential, rather than those resources being spread to support all young people. So as we've moved forward, what's been important for us with Balance is Better has been some principles as well. So these principles take some time to understand, but these are more about, well, okay, if we understand why, how do we put better opportunities in place for our young people? And these principles are tools that we've used here to work with our sports system to put better opportunities in place. Now, a lot of sports wanted a recipe. They just tell us what to do. Well, we haven't taken that approach. We've taken an approach of actually understand your sport, understand why, understand Balance is Better and the values and the principles that are involved. And then we'll work with you to put in place the right solutions depending on your context. And they're going to vary in different parts of the country depending on the needs of the participant. So some of these principles are quite simple. Others take years and years of work to actually implement change. So in terms of taking action, I've given you a little bit of framing. Hopefully you understand the challenge. You see where the Balance is Better sort of philosophy fits. That leads me to how we're taking action here as a nation. So it started by actually aligning our mental models and the sports system starting to work together. So we've worked really hard to bring NSOs and RSOs together, regional organisations, so national and provincial, territorial for you. We've also continued to bring sports together at national and regional levels, as well as other sport partners. So whether that's local government, secondary school partners, other key sort of agencies that we work with, we've really encouraged collective action. And that's meant lifting up and understanding a greater good, and keeping people at the table together and prioritising time outside of their own sport or their own lane. And we've started to see some really exciting momentum. So over the period, there's probably two ways we've approached, before I sort of go into detail around what we've focused on. One focus has been at a high level, at a behaviour change, sort of attitudinal change. So that's been raising awareness of everyone. So this has been more sort of campaign focused, trying to get what our comms team call more cut through above the line. So we're getting out to shape mindsets throughout the country. A lot of our focus outside of that campaign piece has been with our workforce, with our partners. How do we work differently? So a lot of this evidence I've shared, it's been around for some time. So people have known this evidence, but how do we work differently on the ground if we want different results? So there's three things that we've done differently with our partners. If I was to summarize, one is we've helped form really strong leadership positions. So been really clear about the three issues. With Balance is Better, we've gathered data, made sure the evidence is there and aware. We've worked with sports to gather their own data that supports it and make sure that's available. Worked really hard with the participants' voice, and we've really encouraged bold and courageous leadership from our partners. So actions, not just words. We've taken a learning approach throughout this. So that actually goes back to our team here at Sport New Zealand. We had some views, we had some assumptions around why change is so hard at the coalface, at the front line for partners. We went and tested that. So we went and worked with partners for a year to see if our assumptions were right. And those assumptions we then brought back to partners and have worked with them around the skill sets and what our workforce needs to influence change. So that last point of powering up our people and working together has probably been essential. We've tried to put the knowledge in the hands of the change agents, our workforces at national and regional levels, so that they can roll out this work and co-create the right solutions with the people in their community. So a couple of things we've done there that have been important. Even our staff, our teams at Sport New Zealand, rather than sitting in national offices, we've got regional staff around the country that are there to support that national and regional connect more. We do a lot of workforce support for partners, but we actually introduced the new workforce area, which was called a sport development leader residential. And this was based off what our people told us, the skill sets they need help to implement Balance is Better. So it wasn't so much about the evidence, it was about, well, actually, how do we make a change? We know this stuff, but we're struggling to roll it out on the ground. So the sorts of things we do there in a 3-day hui or a residential, we work with them in their context. We work on topics like influence, change management, how they actually use evidence. There's different models and tools with there. We look at change management. That has been a huge asset in terms of our people, giving them the tools and support that they need to actually roll out change. And we're also quite deliberate in some of these learning environments where we brought national and regional staff together and we brought sports together in these learning environments. And we started with only 5. So we knew we couldn't work for the whole system. We started with 5 to see if we could get some momentum and progress. And part of that was ensuring rugby was in the room. So rugby here in New Zealand is probably the equivalent of hockey in Canada. They're our big dog. And if they're in the room and they're working with us, they're going to bring other sports on the journey, which they have. And they've been really brilliant here. So that's what we've focused on, as well as working with our people throughout. So back in September 2019 was probably when we had our first cut-through moment. So after being at the table, so an opportunity came out of that residential I spoke to earlier, where we empowered the sports. Well, if you're going to do something together, what would you do? And they said, well, we're going to run a national campaign. We said, great. How can we support you do that? That actually started with the 5 sports. So that's netball here in New Zealand, rugby, football, soccer for you, hockey. That's field hockey here, and New Zealand cricket were our 5 larger participation sports for youth, which had about 80% of our young people playing them. So we started there. They said first, we need to commit to this. So there's a lot of work that went on to ensure their boards and their leaders understood what they were committing to. And then we had this moment where they stepped out above the line and said, enough's enough. Our backyards aren't clean. We need to do what's right for young people. And we know there's some things happening in our pathways that that's not the case. So this was a big tipping point. As you could imagine, it polarised the media here. A lot of press and broadcast media for a week, actually probably unprecedented media coverage around this conversation, which was great. Got the conversation out there, and we were able to get the right messages out and start to get into the minds of our public around the need for change. So over the last probably 5 years, it's been quite exciting seeing some of the bold and courageous leadership from our partners where they've actually started to turn words into action and drive some of those changes. So you see headlines here of actually a lot of them are rugby, but sports starting to actually drive that change. So not just talking, moving. And look, I'm by no means saying it's perfect here, and there's lots of places that aren't at the same level or sports that aren't moving as fast, but man, we're seeing some amazing things. So just to give you an example of some of those, and this is at national, regional and local levels, we've seen removal of age grade rep teams, things that were happening at U13 have been pushed back to sort of U15. We've seen our main sport rugby come out and say, actually, we're a late maturation sport. So until young people are 16, just let them enjoy their sport and have fun. And yes, there'll be development opportunities, but we're not going to exclude anyone that has the motivation and commitment to do those sorts of things. And they've looked at how they work with talent later on in the system. We've seen huge changes to competition formats. So increase in opportunities and new structures. We call them alternative structures. So unless we change the traditional structures, it's really hard to free up the capacity and time and actually get our sports system to invest in new opportunities. So we're now seeing new offerings for young girls. We're seeing offerings for new inclusion offerings. We're seeing offerings for less active, and sports starting to respond at a local level. And as well as that, we're continuing to see our sports work together. So rather than just working in isolation, they're working together. There's MOUs in place at regional levels where they're shortening seasons. Sports together are holding themselves accountable to overlapping seasons and making sure there's breaks. So some really cool things happening. So we've got national and regional projects that continue to flow. So we had that moment with the statement of intent from the sports, and probably 6 months following that, then they came out with this national campaign called Keep Up With The Play. And this was one of those above the line areas to try and get more awareness of the need to change for youth sports. Some pretty powerful stuff. So have a look.
Okay, line up.
Hey, you two boys.
Come on, other side, girls. Yep.
Quickly, you know where you are.
Everyone happy?
Was it too many practices a week? Or being written off too early? Or specialising in one sport too soon? Was it believing you have to be in the top team? Or being expected to play like professionals? We're losing kids from sport, but you can change that. Keep up with the play to keep kids in sport.
So as you can see, in a way, we're fighting the same enemy. You know, it's attitudinal, it's behaviour change. So why should each sport keep fighting it by themselves? Let's fight this change together. So this was a pretty powerful campaign. It framed the problem really well. And then following the problem, we embarked on sort of also putting up what we call sort of authentic proof points, or national faces of significance and influence. And in the Māoridom, we call that the he mana, that we're speaking to. Actually, that's, you know, what you think is the journey is not my journey in sport. So we had a lot of the celebrities, your Wayne Gretzky's like people here in New Zealand coming out and saying, actually, we believe in this. This is right. This is not our journey. So this was a pretty powerful moment. And at this time back in 2019, we had some pretty significant momentum. So we were halfway through this national campaign. We also had regional forums throughout the country. So a lot of our national leaders got it, but we were told that the real opportunity was at a regional leadership level, so at a provincial and probably a district level for you. That's where we needed to get the education. Unfortunately, COVID hit halfway through this campaign, and we had to stop it and stop the planned regional forums as our worlds changed. So as COVID's challenges have started to lift, through COVID, I suppose, we had to step off our drive for change and started shifting our focus nationally to, keeping everyone safe, helping sport be safe, and obviously sports had to work hard just to survive and deliver sport safely. So we had to sort of step back, take the pedal off the drive for change, and obviously that's been incredibly challenging for many sports and many people. But what was actually really encouraging through this period is the drive for working together continued. So rather than, again, sports interpreting guidelines and putting out messages by themselves, they continued to work together, which was really encouraging. And we actually had some sports go, actually, let's not waste the crisis. Now's an opportunity to change some of these systems that we've never had before. And they used that COVID window to put new structures in place, find efficiencies, which was pretty encouraging. So through the COVID window, we've always had other sports knocking on our door saying, hey, look, we want to join this Balance is Better movement. How do we do it? So in 2021, we actually had another 10 sports come on board and commit to Balance is Better. So you're seeing them in front of you on the slide. So now we have 15 sports committed to sort of driving Balance is Better change. They've all made commitments at leadership levels and at operational levels. And a lot of that is their people committing to work together and work together with other sports. So each of the 15 sports are in different places on their journey. But they're all making progress, and it's pretty exciting to see that this is continuing to move. So as we sort of draw closer, probably towards the end of this message, there's probably been a few key things for us. As people at a local level, at a club level, and clubs of schools around the country see their national sports, committing to these changes, they often go, well, why is that not hitting me in this part of the country? So I think a lot of our work has been on talking about being patient and realising that change takes time. Just because a national organisation is committed to the change, sometimes it might take a little while for that to roll out and actually hit the ground to affect your child at a local level. So part of it has been really important is to keep people, avoid sort of finger pointing. At times there's one step forward, two back, but to really keep this kaupapa and what's most important here front and centre. So our sporting system's been really good at that, and actually the conversations and the great work has continued. At the moment, with the 15 sports, we're actually shaping up 3 new national projects. That's not what we're driving, it's what they've driven. So we're working with them around what they see as the need to support them and continuing with that change. So, we had a colleague leave just last week to another role, and he shared his Balance is Better story with me around a mother on the sideline of his soccer, a 9-year-old mum that was with a clipboard at the start, taking stats, possession, turnovers of the 8-year-olds. He asked her a few questions about what was going on, and his success story was after 2 years, this mother is a complete convert of Balance is Better. Her behaviours have changed. She's much more supportive. She's creating an environment of play and enjoyment for her kids. She couldn't believe her previous behaviours. So it's always quite nice hearing those stories that what's going on is actually hitting the ground and making a difference in different communities throughout New Zealand. We're at currently 2 years into a 4-year strategy. So we had the opportunity just to sort of lift up and reflect. I use the halftime analogy of it's half time. Are our tactics going to change in the second half? Our campfire's obviously still burning very strong, which is quality experiences for all our young people, our rangatahi, which is underpinned by Balance is Better. But actually, is there anything we've learned over the last 2 years that might lead to adjustments in our tactics for the second half? So the 3 things that have come out loud and clear for us here in New Zealand, the first one has been actually shifting the narrative. So even earlier here today, I've spoken to the problem, the challenge. Well, what we're hearing now is actually let's shift this, let's flip this around a little bit and flip the narrative to sport being one of a strength-based narrative. So sport's not the problem, it's the opportunity, and quality of sport experience can do so much more for the well-being of our rangatahi than other forms of physical activity. So let's start to talk about all that good stuff, that added value of a great sport experience. So let's talk about the relationships, the sense of belonging. Let's talk about the development, both from skills, fitness, socially, emotionally, and how that helps young people's confidence. Let's talk about how great sporting environments help our young people to give back, to develop good citizenship and character. So let's start to highlight that. In fact, sport could just be the most powerful thing for our young people at this moment. So part of our work is actually how we shift the narrative and start to talk more about the good, and a way of coming at addressing some of the behaviours. The second thing that is probably really important for us is, if everything's important, nothing's important. So there's so many things coming at our partners at the moment, and a lot of that's from us, our commitments to tītiriti, diversity and inclusion. We need to work with parents. We need to do, there's so many things, but what we've landed on is what we feel the two biggest areas are that will lead to the biggest impact for our young people is coaching and competition structures. So the role of our coaches, and it's the competition structures that are driving a lot of the good or different behaviours. So let's keep focusing on influencing those two systems as much as we can. That's not to say those other areas aren't important, they very much are, but depending on the needs of the young people in different communities will depend on what the coaches need or what the competition structures need to deliver to meet the needs of the young people. So that's where all those areas can come in like different ingredients to support our young people. And the final thing in terms of our reflections was just keeps reinforcing to us that the area where there's more support needed, more capacity, more capability is at a regional, local level for us. So for you, that's probably at a district level in Canada. That's where the biggest challenges are, and that's where we in the system need to continue to focus our energy. So drawing towards the end, a few reflections from us on our learning journey, and some of these you may have picked up already. The first one is probably this: words, we can keep talking, but if we keep talking, we'll still be here in 10 years' time and nothing will have changed. So we've had a big focus on actually actions rather than words, and it doesn't have to be perfect, just start, hence our bold and courageous leadership piece and one of our principles. The other thing that we've focused a lot on, and the sports that are doing really well have spent time ensuring that their leadership understand balances better and they're on board. So that's time with boards, time with CEs, and also time internally within their organisation, making sure different team members understand before they start to work through their membership models. They must understand the why. If they don't understand the why, they're not going to commit the time, energy and resources to support tackling some change that their membership don't want quite often because they don't have the right information. Change management, you heard me touch on before, something our sector doesn't do well, under-resourced, overworked. So change is something that a lot of time isn't given. So by spending time providing frameworks, working with our partners in this space has really helped influence change. And, you know, we don't have all the answers. Our partners don't have all the answers. So making sure we continue to embrace collaboration and working together to tackle these things has been essential. We see that as the only way forward and will continue to be at the front of our kaupapa and our work. The people capability has been essential and as I said earlier, lower in the system. So not just the national leaders, regional and local leaders, how we support their skill sets to be able to tackle the change. You know, the other people at the front line, we can't send them to a gunfight with a knife. We need to give them the right resources there, and that part of that is decentralising some of these models and more flexibility at local levels. So look, you see there again that at a national level, we provide direction and oversight, national alignment, but at a regional and local level is where we really feel that the changes could be made, which is giving you a sense to where we're moving. So we're pretty clear to bring our Balances Better philosophy to life. Our sports system must continue to work together at all levels, national, regional, local, and we must continue to put the needs of our young people first. That always has to be front and centre in our conversations. There's a Māori proverb that captures the heart of our approach here as a nation and the culture change or the influence that we're tackling. That is, he aha, te mea nui, o te ao, he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. So what that actually says is the most important thing in the world, it's the people, it's the people, it's the people. So thank you very much for your time. I hope that's triggered some reflections for you all to continue to do the great work that you're doing in Canada and the communities that you live in. Thank you once again to CERT for this opportunity to share our journey. We'll see you all soon.
Alex, that was simply amazing. So I guess, you know, at this point, it's one of those welcome and good morning for you. This is lovely to have you joining us. And that really was fantastic. Great to have you here.
Thank you, Deborah. Yep, I've had my Tim Hortons and I'm ready to go.
Oh, look at you, just zoning in on it. So that's wonderful. So we have a ton of questions that have been coming in as everyone's been listening. So I'm just going to be sharing a couple with you. I do love kind of that whole framing. It's been such a great conversation and the parallels, even as we're embarking on our new Canadian sport policy. You know, what are the differences? You've said, you know, you speak about collaboration and co-creation and that idea of reaching out, but building it together, you know, seemed to be one of those really big themes that you talked about. So if you had that theme about co-creation, collaboration to help change the narrative, have you experienced any challenges getting the different groups along the journey to come on side?
Look, I think for us, it's never easy. So I think part of it is just being really clear on purpose, and I think a lot of the work we did with sports early on was taking time to really be clear around what they saw as the change and what they were looking for from us. So there was probably I think one of the slides I shared was about patience. I think we're at the table. We started with 5 sports. So again, if we tried to do this with everyone, it probably would have been a lot harder. So we were quite deliberate in starting with 5 sports. That was controversial at the time, but 80% of our youth participation sat on those 5 sports, and those 5 sports had more functioning membership structures and capacity in their membership structures that would actually be able to implement things closer to the ground. So that helped us, and we managed to keep, well, that group wanted to stay at the table for a good year before we actually came up with the work we were going to do together in terms of the campaign, the statement of intent, and what that meant. So I think being patient, starting with 5, and now we've grown to 15, and obviously many other sports are on board as well, just not formally and haven't come out in the public in support in the way that the other 15 have. So that's probably been a focus for us, has just been staying at the table, keeping the main thing, making sure that the sports were clear, and people come and go. The groups have changed. There's been different people. There's been churn in some of those sports. So quite often you've got to bring people back up to speed. So that's just been part of our journey and will continue to be.
That's perfect, and makes sense, as you say. I mean, people do change, and it is the different steps. But as you also reflected, starting with those 5 key sports that had a huge amount, but perhaps manageable to learn a little bit, evaluate, see how it's progressing, and if you've had to tweak it along the way before you've moved it on to the next phases, next steps. So that really kind of speaks to that evaluation and checking it out.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah, perfect. So now we have another great question. So from Leisha, thank you, Manitoba. So how has the Balance is Better campaign been used, if at all, to handle youth participation in school and club sports? These often clash here in Canada and can lead to, all of a sudden, just a second here, and can lead to narrow entry and participation points for youth.
Yeah, no, great question. And now in New Zealand here, we have sort of two pathways as well, where there's the club sort of system and the school system. So because our focus is youth with our rangatahi, sort of 12 to 18, where we're smack bang in the middle of that sort of college, I think it is for you, and club system, and depends on the sport. Depends on whether the pathway continues within the club system, or whether it actually goes into the school system, stays in school, and then comes back out once school's finished. So the Balance is Better sort of philosophy and approach has not just been for the sports, it's been for the whole sports system. So we have entities here in New Zealand called regional sports trusts. So they promote physical activity and work a little bit closer to the ground across all sports. So as a national body, we invest into regional sports trusts as well. And a lot of the work that they've been doing has been supporting the collaboration regionally. And that's not just the club or school system, that's also the school system. And we have sort of college sport organisations that coordinate the inter-school sport in those regions as well. So we have been using Balance is Better. We actually invest into that workforce. So we've been supporting their development as well in terms of Balance is Better. And there's been a lot of regional commitments and memorandums of understanding that have come into place, which have driven, which are both college and club sports systems, which have led to shortening season lengths, which have led to shifting some behaviours actually at the coalface. So club and schools are very much part of this movement and are working together. Like anything, some are much more proactive than others. So we've had some schools that have jumped straight on board and have sort of are drinking the Kool-Aid, where others are taking a little bit longer to shift. And some of that does come down to the leadership again, the principals, and their view of sport, and whether it's being used as a recruitment tool to drive the role and the achievement of their top teams is being used in that way, or whether they're seeing the bigger picture. So, in some places it's a lot quicker, and others we're hoping that the influence around them is starting to put more pressure on those that aren't seeing the right picture.
I mean, interesting, as you say, when you speak to the influencers and what they're being influenced by, be it their peers, be it the environment being very sensitive, and different regions can have different influences, that can affect that. So really good point on that side. So there's several questions it's all going to be dealing with buy-in. So I'm going to synthesize a couple into it from different groups that we've got. We've got kind of this one that says, how did you get, the buy-in from some of the leaders? Equally, how did you get the buy-in from the athletes? Was there resistance from the athletes? How did we get them to see the importance of balance is better? So it's kind of getting the buy-in from a couple of stakeholders, both from the leaders, but in particular, there's kind of like, well, what about the athletes that are in there?
Yeah, so back when we did the work around the talent plan, we were really deliberate around making sure the youth voice was part of our work as well. So there were a lot of analysis and questions asking the young people, and their voice just, I think I spoke to our voice of the rangatahi, our voice of the participant work. So we're continually talking to the young people and making sure that we have their voice, and their voice has probably been louder than anyone else in terms of the need for change. So I think I shared the 70 sort of 30%, and actually digging down into that, there's been lots of focus groups, different sports have done different work around the country as well. So both from a national data through to sort of a more localized club or school sort of voice, we're continuing to engage with young people along the way. We also found, obviously, you'll all know that you need to separate the adults from some of the way of collecting that data, because they will skew and influence the young person. So there were some early learnings where we were getting data from young people with adults involved, and it was different when they were in the room versus when it was just the young person themselves. In terms of the decision makers and the leaders, that piece, especially with the original 5 sports, was really deliberate early on. So we actually went on a road show, myself and a colleague. As you'll all appreciate too, it's not just the CEO. We had to make sure that with the sport lead had briefed up internally, and there was briefings around what was going on. There was also the comms team had to be across things. And then we had meetings with the CEOs and board chairs early on to be really clear that, hey, part of this, the statement of intent and going out, this is what this means. You're going to get these sorts of areas of pushback. Are you really, you're clear that you have had these conversations at the board table, your commitments are genuine. So there was probably a couple of months where it was almost like a road show of ensuring that the decision makers were on board and they were ready to step out and they were committing for the long run, rather than just doing something that was a nice PR sort of exercise and then they'd go back to what they'd always been doing. So, yep. Young people are always at the heart, and decision makers and leaders have been essential. We did a great job with the original 5. The next 15, we didn't take the same approach, but we still ensured that there was commitment and buy-in from boards as well as CEs.
Really good point. And I mean, we just had earlier, there was, we were talking about the boards and governance and getting buy-in from the different players. So really important on that side. So we're going to shift to a different stakeholder group, being the volunteers. And one of you, part of your presentation, you made reference to the volunteers and understanding it. So how is the volunteer situation in New Zealand coming out of COVID, and what effect has it had on community and club sports?
Yeah, so the COVID, I think, obviously has been felt everywhere. The messages, so we had to back off our drive for change with Balance is Better. I think when COVID hit, what was obviously first and foremost was just safety and understanding things, and sport stopped for a little while in places as well. We were probably fortunate with the government's approach. We managed to keep COVID out for quite some time, which allowed us to sort of continue at some level. But as sports sort of returned, and as there's been lots of other sort of pressures, the focus from at a local level, at a community level with our volunteers, was first just interpreting the guidelines and what they meant, and then delivering sports safely. So we sort of stepped off some of our planning and our action just to deal with that. And as we've started to recover, and now that we're coming back from COVID and there's a degree of normality, we've started to re-engage and work again with our NSOs and our wider sort of sports system around the plans that we had pre to COVID, and picking up the momentum of Balance is Better and where we were in terms of progress. We are, there's fatigue out there. The volunteer sports system is tired. So we have to temper that. We're very, very mindful of that. But at the same time, some sports, took the opportunity and didn't waste, didn't, as the saying go, don't waste the crisis. They used the crisis of COVID to actually take a couple of steps forward and make some of the changes to their competition structures that they wouldn't have been able to make if it hadn't presented itself. So there were a couple of different paths of action from some of our partners. And it was great seeing some of those being bold and courageous at that time, where they actually managed to reduce some inefficiencies that were in their structures, make some changes that COVID allowed them that window to do. That's helping them transition their competitions in ways that they couldn't have. It was actually quite great in that way, because they had to be innovative, they had to be creative, and the membership, the public, were more tolerant of taking choices and doing things differently than they might have been if it hadn't hit. So a real mix there, but definitely starting to pick the momentum up now, and we're still very mindful of the coalface and the volunteers and how we best support them, because that's where the real change sits, and that's where the most work is as well, and ensuring that the workload doesn't sit with them. It sits sort of at regional levels, and regional structures are supporting the volunteers. Otherwise the change won't happen, because it's really hard.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I mean, like, really, sport is run by the volunteers. When we look at all the people around it, and if we're losing our volunteers, how do we bring them back in, and how do we keep them involved throughout the lifespan, which is just so valuable. So unique to, both New Zealand as well as, here in Canada, kind of that question: were there any special considerations for participation and equity in and for Indigenous youth in New Zealand?
Yeah, so we've understood our commitments to Te Tiriti, which is our treaty to our Indigenous people here in New Zealand, and I think we're more aware as a nation now of some of our wrongdoings and what our commitments are to support the tangata whenua, so the people from Māori people in New Zealand. So as a government agency, we've been going through quite a cultural rebirth, where there's both understanding and awareness of us and the wider nation, and also increased investment to support Māori and their hapu iwi and whānau in different communities. So whether that's sport or whether that's different forms of physical activity, again, depends on what their needs are. So what we see here in New Zealand, there's a lot of different forms of physical activity, and sport isn't always sport how we would see it. So they have things, kia rahi and sort of dance sort of festivals as well, sort of kaupapa activities, which is sport to them. So how we support them to be physically active in ways that are culturally appropriate and very holistic in a physical literacy sense, where their connections to environment and the spiritual side have always been there, and probably are more so interwoven into how they are. So yes, a lot of support going in, a lot of different sort of approaches. from a Balance is Better perspective as well, I think I mentioned there are three new projects that the 15 sports have come up with themselves in terms of what can we do to help you. And one of those projects has been not translating, because it's much more than translation. It's actually understanding Māori and using Balance is Better in a way to connect with Māori and support their understanding of the right sport as well, because some of their understanding isn't at the same level as it could be. So one of those projects is translating and supporting the national body's workforce to understand our Indigenous people and use Balance is Better as a tool to help educate and support and help our sports understand what their needs are. So it's been translated to Māori, which is kia tau, kia ora, which is be balanced, be well. So we're going through that process at the moment. That's one of the three projects also.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I mean, it's nice to be able to see how it's considering the balance and being sensitive to, okay, what are the needs and what makes sense as to where it's going. So, so again, slightly different lens once again, as we look at this time high performance sport and kind of asking that question. So how are your challenges? And, I guess, how are your colleagues who work for High Performance Sport New Zealand help foster this Balance is Better philosophy? Are they endorsing it? Are they really supporting the importance of physical literacy for your young people? We're kind of using this as probably one of our last questions, but throwing it that way.
Yeah, I recall the same conversation when I was in Canada, and I'm sorry I won't have the entities the same as Own the Podium perhaps, and just that conversation between participation and performance. So we are one organisation, although there's two clearly separate functions, but one of the most powerful things probably for us, especially around the Keep Up With the Play campaign at the time, was High Performance Sport New Zealand came out and backed it, endorsed it. So their commitment for Balance is Better and their endorsement of, hey, look, this is important for our country's most high performing athletes as well, was what really stoked the fire really nicely back there. And we're in constant sort of communication. We've actually got a pathways group that's just been established where there's from a government perspective, the leaders from our organisation, myself and a couple of colleagues, and from their perspective, their pathways team, they call their high performance athlete development, basically as athletes identified before they move into the high performance pathway. They're in those sort of earlier phases where we work quite closely in terms of they go through obviously different cycles of centralised models to decentralised models, and they're decentralising a little bit again. So as they decentralise, we're very mindful that it's really important to stay close in terms of how we support each other's work and the roles and responsibilities in each of our organisations and our partners in terms of understanding both spaces. So I won't say it's perfect, but we are very deliberate in the connections, and it takes, again, like probably early on where it said, you've got to get in the room and you've got to stay at the table together. And I think with high performance, they get it, they're supportive, their language and the way they see things. Sometimes they're looking at the conversation and saying it's a 9. We're looking at it saying it's a 6. It's the same thing, but we're just speaking about it differently. So as we've stayed in the room and got that common understanding, that's really, really helped. So yes, there's alignment. I think there's always going to be people in the systems that see things slightly differently, and individuals that may not have spent the time and understood the BIB philosophy as much. So it's just really important that we are grabbing those people and we're constant with our messages and ensuring there's opportunities to educate. So a lot of work going on there at the moment in terms of that. We're actually working on a new sport pathways framework together. That's actually quite exciting, and it looks at journeys in physical activity and sport in a different way than what it would. So really shifting the narrative around success always being reaching the top to actually success being motivation based, and people being able to participate in a way that they want, and yes, encouraging people to obviously move into performance pathways and try to be the best they can be, but acknowledging that's not the path for most people in sport. So they're still being successful if they're being active in many other ways. So trying to show that in different ways than we have.
Oh, that's excellent. Putting on that lens where you listen to what are some of those key words, because you kept talking about changing the narrative. And I'm very mindful of some of the words that you keep using, that collaboration, that co-creation that, that comes out, that it's being the best they want to be, that it's, again, not being prescriptive as it's going forward. And as you've said, really, how do we change that narrative? And I think I love that whole framing that said, as you referred to it, as shifting the narrative so that sport was not about the problem, it's the opportunity. And I think, that's just such a lovely way to frame it. So as we're wrapping things up now, and again, we are so appreciative of you being able to get up early and join us today. Any final words that you'd like to be saying back to, the sports system and everybody here in Canada, or lessons learned that you'd like us to close on this part?
Oh, look, I just I had 4 years in the Canadian system, and it's all there. Long-term athlete development, the frameworks, the pathways, great people that believe this, and many people that shaped me while I was there as well. So I think the right information, the right frameworks are there. I think the key message probably from me is how you use them closer to the ground, and the education further down to ensure that there's understanding. So quite often, I think probably for us here in New Zealand, sometimes we do things too soon. Like it's by no means perfect, and sometimes we might not have things as well thought through as they need to be, but we just get going. I think sometimes in Canada, I could see a strive for perfection with frameworks, and a lot of that stuff was perfect, but it wasn't hitting the ground. So my message is get going. If it's right for the young people, if it's in their best interests, then go there, move it. We don't have to wait for perfect all the time. Get going.
Oh, beautifully said. It's like, let's get going. Let's make a difference. So thank you so much. This has been fantastic. So thank you to everybody who have been sharing all their questions. We've got so many more, but Alex, this has been great. Special thank you to Alex for joining us and making SCRI, one of the best in over 16 years. Great stuff all around. This has been wonderful.